Social security is the heading.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, and indeed, that is what I said, and what I stand by. What has happened is that there has been there are movements within London, as you would expect. The recent headline I saw showing that 50,000 households had been driven out of the city was completely inaccurate. I saw that in a newspaper during the election campaign. Actually, that reflected the moves within the city. Actually, most of them very near to the moves were not very far away. And only 2,700, I think, over the period concerned, actually were displaced outside London. But the answer is to build more homes, as I've said to you many times so far.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said you stand by what you say, but this is a broken promise, Mr. Mayor. I'll quote to you what you said, which is that on my watch you are not going to see thousands of families being evicted from the place they have been living and where they have put down roots. Now, as you've already acknowledged, 50,000 families have been moved out of their home boroughs between July 2011 and July 2014. Hang on, I haven't finished yet.
Sorry.
Hang on. They have been moved out of their home boroughs. You said you are not going to see thousands of families being evicted from the place they have been living and where they have put down roots. Many of these families have been moved far from where they set down, and there is a clear pattern of people being moved from inner London boroughs to outer London boroughs, and particularly to the east of London, from west to east. There is a clear pattern of people being moved. These are people who are being moved out of where they have put down roots and where they have been living. And 2,700 families, of course, have been moved out of London altogether. That is thousands of families who have been moved. Why have you failed on this, Mr. Mayor, when you promised that this would not happen?
You've got 8.6 million people living in London. There are of course there are going to be moves in any year. I think the figures, 2/3 of the households in temporary accommodation are actually living in the borough where they became homeless. And one of the things I think is totally wrong is to suggest that somehow London is becoming like Paris, for instance, and moving huge numbers into great.
But that is what is happening, and I've seen the figures, I've seen the pattern. You are seeing large falls in certain boroughs and big increases in other boroughs, like Enfield, for example, big increases, big drops in places like Kensington and Chelsea. We are seeing the Parisification, if you want to call it that, of London. And it's a tragedy. And you talked earlier, Mr. Mayor, about social mix and the importance of social mix.
Yes, you're getting more of a social mix, because what's happening, actually, it's talking complete nonsense, if I may say so, because what's happening, if you look at London, the overwhelming majority of social homes is in the centre of the city.
You
talked, the overwhelming majority of social homes, 30% of affordable of the housing stock in the centre of the city is affordable. What you're now seeing, and very little historically has been in the outer suburbs, what you're now seeing is the creation of much more mixed communities in the outer London boroughs, but that's actually levelling up.
We are
levelling up with the centre of the city. We are by no means. Paris is absolutely the opposite. Paris has a completely bourgeois centre and monocultural banlieue, which are places of great deprivation. That is not the case in London at all.
Mr. Mayor, you talked earlier about social mix, and now to add to this,
yes,
you support a policy which means forcing councils to sell off properties in higher value areas, which is precisely going to exacerbate this, which is precisely going to take away the kind of accommodation we need to house homeless people.
We can repeat the conversation.
This is yet another. I am simply holding you to account for the pledge that you made. You made this pledge. It is yet another broken pledge. Just like your pledge on rough sleeping, just like your pledge on not closing ticket offices or fire stations. All of these pledges, broken promises. Frankly, Mr. Mayor, go to the House of Commons. They're welcome to you. The sooner you get out of the city, the better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the people of this city and indeed this country looked at who they would rather have in government and who'd kept their pledges. And if you look at what we've delivered over the last few years, I think it's a very, very good record. And I said I would build 100,000 of more affordable homes. We've exceeded the record of the Labour Party. We are building record numbers of homes now. And you are completely wrong to say that London is becoming like Paris. It's absolute nonsense. You plainly, I would obviously you stay in London, but if you ever get the chance to go to Paris, you will see it is utterly, utterly different. What is happening now is that actually the outer London is becoming more mixed in its socio-economic makeup. Inner London yes, you are seeing changes, but you already have the overwhelming proportion of affordable homes or social homes in the centre of the city. So you're actually seeing a rebalancing. You're seeing a rebalancing of the city, and you've seen very, very few people driven out of London, as I said I would not tolerate.
Can you bring your comments to a close? Let's move on to the next question. Question one.
Andrew's got a supplementary.
Oh, and yes, sorry. A supplementary question from Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. Well, talking about Outer London, what do you say about your pledge to the 140 families who are the former residents of Sweets Way and Totteridge, Outer London, who were all evicted by Annington Homes in February? They've been scattered to the four winds, away as far as Birmingham, Luton, Chingford, all over North London, because of high rents and because of the capricious approach to enforcing their policies by Barnet Council. That's Outer London. They've been moved out.
Well, the numbers who've actually been driven out of London are very small. Of course, there are moves within the city, but you'd expect moves within the city in a city of 8.6 million people. And actually, I think the numbers, relatively speaking, have been nothing like what was predicted. And you certainly haven't seen, as I said, you certainly haven't seen great convoys of dog carts moving around London, let alone out of London.
So what do you say to Juliet, who was on these Sweets Way residents? She was sent to Tottenham, then Cricklewood, is now in temporary accommodation in Potter's Bar, far from her work at B&Q, far from her daughter's school, far from her roots, as you would put it. She has to spend an extra £72 a week on fares to work and to her daughter's school. Well, what do you say to Dylan, also who lived in that area for 12 years, whose 10-year-old brother the council threatened to take into care when her family was evicted, is now in temporary accommodation a long way from the brother's school, and whose future accommodation is dependent on appeal to Barnet Council. What do you say to those
these
people?
Are hard cases, and
those are real people.
What I would say to them, and I understand that obviously they will be in positions of hardship, and I regret that. But what I would like to see is them having the opportunity to get the accommodation they need, and that means building more homes, which is what we're doing.
I could list many, many more of these people from Sweets Way. All have these problems. They're not just hard cases. They are real people who have suffered as a result of your failures. Aren't they, to quote your words, aren't they being evicted from the place they've been living and where they've put down roots? That's what you said wouldn't happen. That's precisely what's happened to them. You've accepted it happening to them, haven't you?
Well, the answer is to build more homes across the city. And not everybody can live, I'm afraid to say, not everybody can afford to live in the area that they necessarily want to live, and that, I'm afraid, applies to everybody. Now,
you said you wanted to stop people being evicted from the place they were living and where they put down roots. That's exactly what's happened to these people, isn't it?
Relatively speaking, in a city the size of London, and with the huge numbers that move every year, I think we've restricted those numbers very substantially. The headline on the news article, in the article, was that 50,000 people had been expelled from London. That was absolutely untrue. The figure was 2,700. Yes, of course, there are moves within the city, but they are much.
I'm
not remotely complacent. Well, I think, on the contrary, I think it was the Labour Party. The Labour Party who was chronically complacent and failed to build enough homes. And if you had an ounce of intellectual honesty, you would look at that record and you would accept that you failed to see the difficulties coming, you failed to build the homes when the crisis was beginning, and we have very substantially remedied the problem. We will continue to build more.
Next